You are about to watch one of a series of workshops that ChurchWorks put on as part of our Accelerate Wellbeing Programme. Accelerate Wellbeing is supporting 6 innovative and highly impactful church-led wellbeing initiatives to scale and replicate to bring their incredible work to more people in more places across the UK. This involves exploring partnerships with other churches in new locations and opportunities to scale up the initiatives through commissioning by public sector bodies such as the NHS, the council or the police. These workshops, delivered throughout 2025, are part of the support we are offering our cohort, as we invite brilliant speakers to cover topics from how churches can best engage in their local health system, how to grow well through good fundraising and governance, and how to maintain a Christian ethos in the process. The topics and speakers were just too good not to share, so we'll be releasing recordings of the workshops once monthly on our ChurchWorks YouTube. We won't share recordings of the interactive discussion between the cohort and the speaker after the presentation is finished, but we will share reflective questions at the end of each workshop to help you reflect on the content in your own context. We hope you enjoy the workshop, and please visit churchworks.org.uk and sign up to our newsletter to stay in touch.
Well, let me just give a bit of background. And what I'm about to say may be less convincing about my expertise and more some kind of cry for help, in that I've had a lot of trustee roles and sort of board roles over the last 20-something years. So I currently have 2 trustee roles, one with a charity called Oasis Community Housing, one with a charity called the Guild of Health and St. Raphael, which sounds very fancy, or Go Health for short, also part of the ChurchWorks network. And I'm also the chair of the board of a registered provider of social housing called J49, which is just converting to become a charity. So I'll have 3 charity trustee roles all on the go at the same time imminently. And I've been a trustee of a youth work charity called Icon in Surrey, a homelessness charity called Just Life, which works in Brighton and Manchester, and something called One Rock International, Christian mission leadership charity, which runs out of Westminster Central Hall, but works globally essentially. And then I've had a couple of board roles with what are called community interest companies, which you might be familiar with, which are legal structures for social enterprises, as well as a number of other sort of advisory council roles. So as I say, that's where my experience comes from, is a lot of these roles, a lot of time spent in board meetings. And just to state the obvious, on the other side of the boardroom table, so to speak, as a chief exec of charities as well, so sort of working with a board rather than being on the board. So that's sort of where I'm coming from. Let's have a look at governance together. So just slide down through those slides. Just down here, perfect. This quote just gets us started on the what. It's probably a statement of the obvious, but let's make sure that we sort of just digest it. Where possible, I put links to all of the sources. You'll see those on the slides, and we'll send out the slides afterwards. So do take notes, of course. Feel free to ask questions as we go, but you don't have to jot down everything from the slides. We will, of course, send that out. So the Charity Governance Code says that good governance is fundamental to a charity's success. It enables and supports a charity's compliance with the law. That's one of the reasons we're interested in it, and relevant regulations. It also promotes a culture in which everything works towards fulfilling the charity's vision. That's the more exciting bit, of course. There is something about vision and mission that governance helps to support and coordinate. So when we're talking about governance, we're sort of bringing those 2 things together. How do we keep on top of legal responsibilities, regulatory responsibilities, but also an exciting culture, vision, mission, and sort of moving forwards? So that's the what. Let's move down just to another definition that just helps bring together 3 elements. This is from a book called Management for Social Enterprise, so it's coming at it more widely than the charitable legal structure. I've added the word cultural in the first word on this slide, so that governance is about cultural, I think, And then this quote goes on to say strategic and operational board level leadership, enabling service users, managers, trustees, and other defined stakeholders to create and maximize social benefit. And if we just go down one more, this just summarizes what that encapsulates. And it's pretty obvious, isn't it? But it's saying that quote about governance encapsulates, holds within it the general tasks of the board, whether that's a trustee board or a board of directors of a community interest company. It might even be a sort of a council or a group of trustees that are part of a church, of which our project is part. So the general tasks of the board, recognizing that it has strategic and operational responsibilities. I've added cultural in there as well. It's encapsulating the groups that they influence and are influenced by. I'll use the rather clumsy term service users predominantly, but I understand that's not always the phrase we want to use. And we want something obviously often a bit more personal. But the groups they influence is really what we mean, is really talking about service users. And then the raison d'etre, the reason for existing of the organisation, again, the exciting bit, the vision, the mission, the creating and maximising social benefit. All right, consent. So on to the why. It's the same again. Why do we do good governance? Why do we want good governance? To comply with our legal and regulatory duties, to lead on culture and strategy, to put service users, beneficiaries, clients, etc. first, and to maximise positive impacts. I've put positive in brackets in there. This comes from the same book that I've quoted above. Actually, I should have put the link in here as well. The role of good governance being, why do we do it? To maximise impact. Actually, what we mean by that, or should mean by that, is to maximise positive impacts and minimise any negative impact. Of course, any negative impact would be unintentional. None of us set out to do things that are not good, but perhaps to minimise environmental impact. Or indeed, if we learn something along the way about what's working or not working about our projects, our charities, then we might want to do what we can to minimise any negatives. And so the board all have a role in those four things just on there. And just down to two more on why, and then I'll just pause to make sure that we're all doing okay. One of the reasons is about the wider environment in which particularly charities are operating. And that is what we might describe as a more robust charity commission. I think there's things about that that are quite good. There's things about that that I'm a bit nervous about. So the Charity Commission's own strategy says that they will support charities to get it right, but take robust action where we see wrongdoing and harm. I'm a bit nervous about what they might look at to see those things, but I also agree that it's important that they do have that regulatory sort of oversight. Okay, and then the Charity Commission's strategy says, amongst other things, that they will also be a tough enforcer. So getting governance right is the right thing to do, of course, in itself, but also complies with this stated strategy of the Charity Commission to be more robust than it has been. What might that look like on the next slide? If I can use my own quote, this is not in anything, but I use it a lot in the various boards and things I'm part of, and with chatting with people who are interested in becoming trustees. I try to summarize the sort of the why, what do we do, the sort of big picture of governance, and particularly in the role of trustees, that trustees are jointly and equally responsible for ensuring that the charitable money, that's a slightly clunky term, but charitable money emphasizes that the money that charity receives is somehow special, it's somehow different. It comes with generosity and as a gift, and with the tax advantages of gift aid. So there is something different about charitable money to perhaps just money, if we can put it that way. So it's ensuring that the charitable money is spent to best effect on the stated charitable mission. The word stated is in there, again, quite intentionally, because trustees are responsible for what is publicly declared about what the charity is and does. not necessarily what any individual trustee or even the chief exec of the time or whatever else sort of thinks might be the thing to focus on. Those things may not be misaligned, but the focus should be on the publicly stated charitable mission. In more technical terms, the charitable object are what sort of direct what trustees are responsible for. Let me also just emphasize the words jointly and equally. So good governance, why do we do it? It's to help all of the trustees be properly informed, have good conversations, make good decisions, document those decisions, because trustees are jointly and equally responsible. I have seen in a number of settings, and certainly have also heard of settings where effectively, if the chair of the board says something's going to happen, then it happens. Or if the finance committee say they've looked at something and they're happy, then all of the other trustees sort of nod along. That's not to diminish the role of the chair or a finance committee. They both play important roles, but good governance helps us to make sure that trustees are sort of protected because they are jointly and equally responsible. All making sense so far? Sam, Paddy, any just to pick up on there, or indeed anyone else, given that we've got a smaller crowd before I move forward? Making sense so far? Statements to the obvious, but just hopefully just reassuring if you might be on the right track. Hopefully you're nodding along a bit. Right. Okay. On to a bit of how do we do good governance. I sometimes worry that it sounds like I might be oversimplifying in this, but to some extent, how do we do good governance? It's largely just answered, I think, by asking good questions. And that takes a bit of skill. It takes sometimes a chairperson to help facilitate those conversations and those questions to open them up rather than sort of shut things down. Again, we're thinking sort of democratically, the jointly and equally responsible sort of thing. People need to be able to ask good questions. Helpfully, the Charity Commission have a one-page document. The 15 questions trustees should ask. The image of it is there on the right-hand side, and the link to it is just below that right-hand side image. And it outlines 15 questions that if trustees are sort of asking these kinds of things, not necessarily in every meeting, but perhaps once a year, perhaps once a quarter, some of them every couple of years, then trustees would be doing a good job on the governance front. So it's asking things like, are we financially strong enough to continue to provide services for our beneficiaries? Are we an effective trustee body? Have we considered collaborating with other charities? We might not want to ask that question in every meeting, but certainly perhaps once a year in an away day as we think about strategy. Are we making the best use of our staff and volunteers? What effect is the current economic climate having on our charity and its activities? That's the question that one of those charities I chair, the Guild of Health, that's the question we're asking the Board of Trustees at our away day, which is in May, to have some time to think about those things and sort of document it, get the input from the board so that we have some space and time to do that. So good governance, how do we do it? To some extent, it's just ask good questions and have the space and sort of create the climate to do that. On to the next one. Specifically for charities, well, I'm conscious that the kind of projects in and around the sort of Accelerate Wellbeing space, are either projects of churches, within church structures, are charities in their own right, could go on to develop into community interest companies, I suppose. Those are not beyond the realms of possibility. So this slide does focus more on charities specifically, that the Charity Commission produced this guide, again, the sort of cover image on the right with the link to it just below, the essential trustee. And how do we do good governance? The Charity Commission is really quite clear about this, so just doing what they say is a good start. And it's not onerous. It's to send this out to all new trustees. They should read it and be familiar with it. I think probably all prospective new trustees, those considering the role, should be given a copy so they can read it through before taking on the role. I think it's helpful to refer to it in away days and in board meetings, just as a reminder of this is what good governance looks like. This is what trustees should be doing as part of their responsibilities, part of their sort of their focus in board meetings in particular. And then for those organisations amongst the cohort that are not charities or not yet charities, then it's worth having a look at anyway. I think there's lots and lots of good stuff in the Essential Trustee that helps with good governance and best practice sort of approaches. I will say, Claire mentioned at the beginning, of course, what we have in mind with all of this is sort of good governance for growth. And part of the reason for having this workshop and mentioning these things is, in my experience, most definitely, that it is much, much easier to start these things now while organisations are small. They're very difficult, I find, to retrospectively apply once an organisation is already quite big. So it sounds a bit silly, but I have been and am part of boards of charities that have £100,000 of income or £200,000 of income. And it is much, much easier for them to behave as if they are a charity with £1 million of income or even £10 million of income, and to build and to be that as they in fact build towards it. To take good minutes, to properly induct new trustees, to send out this kind of material, to ask good questions, to recruit a good chair. Much easier to do that while organisations have got that £100,000 of income or £200,000 of income, or even just tens of thousands of pounds, and then behave as if they are £1 million or a £10 million charity, and sort of move into that rather than try and retrospectively work back towards it. Okay, we're doing all right for time. We're going to hear from Sam in a bit and then open up for questions and discussion as well. On to the who. Who do we want involved in good governance? I mean, these may well be statements of the obvious, particularly the first one. The Charity Commission, again, strongly recommend using a skills audit. Paddy, you may well have come across these, of course, and there are templates that are well worth just using, and no point reinventing the wheel on these. Use a skills audit once a year, maybe once every 2 years, and recruit trustees to fit the skills that our particular charities need. That makes a great deal of sense. That's good governance, good practice to demonstrate that that's being done. It's my experience, and increasingly I'm more and more convinced about this, that it's a really good move to appoint a company secretary. That can be a trustee. It doesn't have to be. In the Guild of Health charity that I chair, we employ a company secretary just for a few hours a week. It's one of the best investments the charity has made because it creates a bit of a sort of trinity, if you like, of CEO, me as chair, and then the company secretary, where the three of us can then just keep an eye on good practice, on governance, on the governing documents having a resonance with governance. The governing documents is where good governance sort of is embedded for each organisation as well, and having a company secretary to always have their radar sort of focused on the governing documents. How do we do things? Are papers out on time? Are we properly engaging our members if a charity has members? What about an AGM, etc., etc.? I found really, really important. I found it particularly difficult where the chief exec is the company secretary as well. I find it split the attention of the chief exec. It's not uncommon, but if it's possible to have those three roles, I think the who of governance is sort of enabled by having those three roles as separate roles. Do think about diversity and actively recruit for diverse experience, opinion, expertise, background, and insight. The kind of thing that if we're in America, we might be being told off for, but let's not go there just at the moment. I think that's just a no-brainer. Who do we want? We want a range of people, and a range of people that reflect our service users. Again, we'll hear more about that from Sam, I'm sure, and we heard about it at Portcullis House with the emphasis on it being youth-led. So recruit for diversity and expertise and opinion, background, and so on. One of the things that's been on my mind over the last few months is there's a chap called Rory Sutherland. If you on any social media, he's suddenly sort of all over it in the last year or so. He's quite a large chap, a marketing expert. He works for a marketing company called Ogilvy. And in his book called Alchemy, the references at the bottom, he draws the distinction between lots of organizations that think with logic which is not in itself a bad thing. But he wants to emphasize in his book that also we should have people in our organizations, private sector companies, public sector organizations, third sector organizations, with what he calls psychologic. I guess we might perhaps use the words intuition or discernment, a sense of being in tune with what our service users are experiencing or what's going on. In some settings, Paddy, you might have come across this in the homelessness sector. We talk quite a bit about psychologically informed environments or trauma-informed approaches and so on. People that have psychologic, to use Rory Sutherland's phrase, perhaps might be tuned in to that experience of trauma, those psychological sort of responses to certain environments, to certain approaches that are deeply important in running a charity. I'll give you one example from Rory Sutherland's book. He says to never call a behaviour irrational until you really know what the person is trying to do. I tended to find in board meetings, sometimes trustees sort of hear the stories from the front line and they say, well, gosh, that person just needs sort of dealing with because they were acting badly or, were presenting a risk. And their concern is a genuine one, but they might also be viewing a behaviour as somehow irrational or simply bad, if we can put it that simply, because they might lack a little bit of the psycho-logic rather than the logic, in Roy Sutherland's phrases, to sort of have a sense of what that person is actually trying to do or responding to. So recruit board members and or sort of advisory group members where we have them. So again, one of the ways in which Way operates. So we've got that rounded experience, but recruit well, recruit with a proper process. That's probably, again, a statement of the obvious, but lots of charities, of course, simply recruit largely people from their own networks or indeed their mates. So try and recruit widely. On to the next one, and then I'll hand over to Sam in just a mo. The when of good governance. I like a good calendar. I try and plan with the charities I'm involved in a plan for at least a year ahead, if not more so. Thinking about board meetings, probably once a quarter, 4 of them a year, maybe 5, maybe 6, ideally not more than 6, no one wants too many meetings. But have your board meetings, perhaps finance meetings, finance committee meetings, if you have one, an AGM, the clue is in there, of course, an annual general meeting, so have that once a year, an away day, probably once a year, time for the CEO and the chair to get together, time for the CEO with their senior leadership team, appreciating that a number of the Accelerate Wellbeing projects are pretty small, so the senior leadership team may also include, quite a wide range of roles and responsibilities. Do the skills audit that I've already mentioned annually or biennially. Have I got the right word there for every 2 years? I'm never sure. Annually or every 2 years is what I mean with that one. Have an away day. I think using a facilitator, ideally someone that's cheap or free, but I think they're also worth paying for to help create some space, meet in a different space, think big picture and so on. It's really useful. Of course, for us as faith-based organizations, think about the rhythm, the rituals of prayer during the year as well. Build relationships, invest time in getting the board and the senior team together to build relationships as much as just to do business, and embed some rhythms, some rituals, I've called them, strange word perhaps, but rhythms to embed the values, to hear from service users, to listen, to visit, to just go and hang out and be part of things. All right. Any burning questions? Anything in that quick overview that's not making any sense or just needs any clarity? Otherwise, I'm going to ask Sam to just have a chat about how they've done this at Way. Paddy, do you want to just go in there?
Yeah, I mean, the one thing I thought kind of not missing, but I've recognised we've had as a policy for a while is making sure we've got at least one trustee with lived experience of some of the challenges that we're trying to deal with.
Amazing.
And I know you've got that in the kind of rituals to embed values and hearing from service users, but I found that has been really powerful for the trustees who are often people external, they're not seeing the front line, and then they've got someone who's there in the meetings that can actually explain, well, this is what it's like in reality and in real life. I think that's quite...
I totally agree, Paddy. Yeah, I think that's really, really important. I I think I had it in mind when I was talking about recruiting for diversity as well, but I should have been more explicit. I think essentially, as you say, sort of the voice of lived experience directly onto the board, I think, is really important. I won't give details away that I shouldn't, of course, but Oasis Community Housing, of which I'm a trustee, don't just include a skills audit for their board, and they also have a sort of staff survey. They try to sort of get some sense of the lived experience across their board and their staff team to make sure that that is coming to the fore and is listened to and is recruited for at board and team level. Yeah, without a doubt. Yeah, totally agreed. Thank you. Great. Shall we come to you, Sam? You've got a small audience here, but if we can make this next 10 minutes available, at least to the cohort, there's the wider audience across the cohort that you're addressing as well, of course, but 10 minutes from you, if you don't mind, on your journey setting up Way as a charity, some of the advantages, disadvantages, how you came to that decision. Over to you, Sam.
Yeah, so I'll, as you mentioned, as this goes out, I'll kind of cover it as a whole and then answer kind of tailored questions that might be helpful for those here and wider. So firstly, I'll introduce myself and then say a bit my personal story and how we got to where Way was, and then the exciting bit Way's story, which is still unraveling, which is fun. And so I'm Sam. I'm the CEO of Way UK, which is a young person led charity here in Swindon, and we work with young people to enable lasting change in their lives and then also drive lasting change in their community. And we do that through hospital-based projects, community-based mentoring through a diverse pool of volunteers, sports-based projects, creative-based projects, and a youth participation group, which we call Way Changemakers, who lead or commissioned by a local authority to lead on projects that shape change in Swindon. So that's Way, and it's been a 2-year journey for Way, maybe a little bit longer, and an even longer journey for me that kind of led to this place of going, actually, we need to do things differently, and the church is really well placed to make this happen. So before my role at Way and the Way kind of journey, I was a project director at a charity in another town, leading on a youth project. Now, the charity had a wider mission to support people locally, and the youth project really kind of took off doing similar stuff to Way, but slightly different. So as we was doing that and seeing it really thrive, I started to notice that actually it became a bit tricky with the charity having such a broad mission and vision, reaching different groups, that actually and in this I'll relate the journey back to governance, which is obviously the theme. I realized actually the governance and the trustees and the team making at the end of the day the kind of final decisions weren't necessarily always making decisions in the best interest of young people, not because they didn't care about young people, of course they did, but because they were trying to take into account all the different aspects of that broader charity when there was a really focused a vision and mission of that project. So I realized, okay, hang on, this is a bit tricky. There's a bit of a sticking point when there's a real focused mission and vision within a broader charity, or the context could also be a church, I suppose, as well, a church structure. Realized that actually, and it wasn't just this charity that was doing it, and actually it was a great charity with great trustees and leadership, but those on the board wasn't reflected of those that we were serving. And how could they know that they were making decisions in the best interest of those that we exist for if those that we exist for aren't in the room or aren't having their voices heard effectively in the room? And I noticed actually the voluntary sector was particularly guilty at that, and was quick to point it out in the public sector when it wasn't happening, but we had a plank in our own eye. And then I also realized that actually charities that had been around for a while, and this is one of the friction, could sometimes become more risk adverse, which would often stifle new initiatives. Now, obviously, you've got to take into account risk, and that's one of the key things about good governance and asking good questions as you're considering risk. But especially early on, I think risks have to be taken, and ensuring that there's governance that can back that, as well as measuring the risk, was really crucial. So there's a bit of a journey there, and then ended up in Swindon with my family and part of a church called Gateway here, who were just fantastic and really shared this vision for reaching young people, particularly outside the walls of a church building. What does it look like to see the kingdom of God outworked in the community here in Swindon? And so after this kind of journey, we then gathered young people, particularly from the local church, who were aged 16 to 25, and asked them, what is it that you guys see? What is it that you want to see changed in Swindon? So again, it's coming back to that vision and mission. And understanding the purpose of what we want to do. And then we prayed into it. And one of the key things in the list just prior from Steve was prayer is a key factor. And sometimes as Christians, it feels like the right answer, the right Sunday school answer. Yes, we've got to pray these, but actually it was so crucial from the very beginning. And we've made sure that we try to keep a culture of prayer through everything we do. But right at the beginning, praying into it. Because once we understood the vision and mission, and we created a vision and mission document to understand what is it that we're trying to do here, so that it would inform then structure and governance and what that looks like and how are we going to achieve this vision and mission. But I think that has to come first. So it's not going, oh, let's set up a charity, or the charity is definitely the best way to do this. Well, it might not be. What's the vision and mission, and what's the scale of that vision and mission that you want to get to? Because I think that then for us informed what that looked like. Okay, so Way UK story, what did that look like? We had these young people gathered in a room, passionate about seeing change, the kingdom outworked in Swindon. We had no money. How do we do it? So we knew what we wanted to do, and this is where the church is so key. Gateway Church exists as a charity. It has existing governance, it has existing policies, it has existing insurance, it has accounts that are published on the Charity Commission website. So when I was keeping my eye out on funding available locally, so when funding grant rounds became available, particularly through the local authority, Safer Streets round, oh, great, there's funding there. Have a conversation with the church. Can you host us? Can you incubate us for a while? We don't have governance. We don't exist. We don't have any of these things. Can you help us so we can start delivering under the governance of the church? And because we had that vision and mission and were really clear, we had that conversation with the church that we found that actually, because the vision mission was so clear for young people and the desire was to see it scaled up, we realized actually this needs to be its own entity further down the line, but so that we could start straight away, the church then incubated. So to enable us to start delivering straight away, whilst we set up as a charity. When exploring that, there was two different routes we explored. One was a CIO, where you're just registered with the Charity Commission, and one with is a CIC, which is where you're just registered with Companies House, but you're not for profit. There was pros and cons for both. At the end of the day, so the CIC usually incomes more from kind of sales and things like that, although you can get grants as well. CIO is mainly from grant making and things like that. But also the structure is slightly different. The CIC, we knew we could get that set up really quickly and get going. So we nearly went down that option. But actually, for the sake of good governance, we went down the CIO route, as well as the structure being better from where our income stream is coming from. Now, as part of that, so we went down that route, but as part of that conversation, we wanted to be really radical in some of the things that I had mentioned before. And actually, we want to make sure that young people and their experience are on that board. So we made a commitment to ensuring that 50% of the trustees would be young people under 25. So legally, it has to be 16, so 16 to 25. So we gathered a wider group of young people to create a young leadership board. And so which the young trustees sit on. So you have the young trustees, they are then part of a young leadership board who are actually really driving the vision and mission, with the trustees bringing that accountability, that governance, making sure that we're compliant, asking those good questions. What's great then is the leadership board also creates a great training ground for future young trustees. And then we wanted to go even further and think, actually, how can we create a group, therefore, of young people who are actively engaged in their community and participating in creating change, which is where we then create the Changemakers group. Now, the majority of the Changemakers group have come from the hospital and the mentoring. And so there's a pathway from those who have received support all the way from a crisis in hospital, being part of that youth participation group, Young Changemakers, then sitting on the young leadership board, and then potentially being a trustee. So that's not going to be everyone's journey. But I think going further than going, great, we have representation on the board. Therefore, great, we're ticking that box. Not suggesting that Steve was mentioning that at all, but that is a trap you can fall into. But ensuring that actually there's a culture and a process that young people can and are informing all the way through through the organisation structure and culture. So we spent a lot of time actually then sitting down as trustees. I was a trustee at the time when we first got going and since stepped down to be employed as we transitioned, and young people to understand what is it that we're setting to achieve here. Now, then there was with the young people setting up the charity, there was the setting charitable objectives, setting forming the governing document, the constitution. And that's where it was a little bit tricky because the language is a bit more formal, almost feels a little bit like a template. So we held intention that this is what we want to achieve, but we want to make sure that we're doing it properly. We want to make sure that we're using the language that the Charity Commission uses. And so that's where we spent a lot of time kind of wrestling with that. The other thing I would say as well is one of the key things that would be a factor and why we knew this right away and why we knew that we wanted to become a separate entity is if we were stayed within the church has the charity objectives of advancing the Christian faith. Now, as a charity, although we still have Christian values and inspired by the Christian faith, we don't have that as our charity objectives. Now, working with the public sector and finding grants through different foundations, that enables the charity to access funding that the church wouldn't be able to and have a reputation that would be a barrier if we had stayed within the church. So that was another reason which caused us to become our own separate charity. So we partnered with the church, and over time, we slowly transitioned. So initially we got funding coming in through the church. Then we set up, after understanding what our vision and mission was, and formed the constitution and applying to the Charity Commission. We set up as a charity and we existed as a charity January 24. And then this is the other thing that was really helpful. We were still able to reach young people, still able to outwork the projects whilst being under Gateway. And we were able to slowly chip away at everything that would mean that we're ready to go and hit the ground running when we were our own charity. So things like bank account, things like making sure we have our policies in place, insurance, all the kind of IT systems. So it enabled us to do that in a slow, unhurried way because we were incubated by the church, which wouldn't have been possible if we'd have tried to do it straight away ourselves. And then so finally, when we had all that in place, we moved everything across, and that started from February this year. But we were able to slowly transition. So we signed up for some funding we applied for some funding that we secured with Gateway, and there was a point where any new applications would come under the new charity. And so it meant that as our deliverables and funding period came to an end with Gateway, the new ones all came through Way UK. So it's that seamless transition into that new entity. But a new entity that is only possible through the support of the local church, both the structure of the church, but also those the people in the church, the facilities of the church, the in-kind support, everything that the people, local people in the church were providing. So it was only possible by that. But then a charity that is young person led, all the way through from the ground to the board level, which I think is essential. It's not just a nice to have. I think it's essential. And we found that the impact of our projects has been far more impactful because young people have been shaping it from the beginning. We found that local authorities, the police, health, are more likely to partner with us because they know that young people are co-producing it along the way. And so I know that's a little bit more difficult depending on the group that you're working with. I imagine if you're aiming at supporting under threes, you're not going to have an under three on the trustee board, but what's other ways that you can ensure that those voices are not just consulted, but around the decision-making table as the charity. So so the last thing as well is we're now finding that actually in different stages of the setup, we've needed different skill sets particularly on the trustee board, but in that kind of leadership position. So early on, we needed people who bought into the mission and vision and were able to, so we had someone who's senior in health, who really was fantastic at making sure we were watertight with safeguarding. We had someone whose background is in data protection to make sure that we're watertight and compliant with those sorts of things. We're now in a position, because we've taken on staff, we've got 5 staff members. Okay, we're now searching we need someone in HR to join us. So I think it's doing that audit, which was mentioned along the way, which I think you need to do more regularly early on to understand, do we have the right skills in place for the season that we're in? And so that's a key thing that we found as well.